This is the third episode of the code journey, and in this episode I'm going to be going over the Etch-A-Sketch project in the Foundations course of the Odin project. I'll be mainly going over the JavaScript for my project. So this is my Etch-A-Sketch website, and it's quite simple. So we have the pen color here, where you can just change it through an input color tag. And then that's the background color of the canvas that I've labeled it as canvas. You can toggle rainbow, which is just make sure pen rainbow colored. There's the eraser. You can change the size of the grid, just like that with this. You can actually toggle the grid on if you want to check it out, see the actual physical size, and just a clear canvas button to clear your drawing. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so here's the code. First I'll show you a bit of the HTML, then I'll just go on to the JavaScript and I'll explain any relevant CSS if needed. So the HTML is fairly simple. So there's the div class for the header, which is just the Weber sketch you see up the top. And then this div here that says main, that's just the main content. So the settings bar on the left and the grid on the right, it's the canvas. And then all the divs here are related to anything in the settings here. As you can see, these divs here for a color pick, for these two input tags and the text. All the buttons are clearly the buttons, and this div class contains the input range tag and the text for it. And the last div in the main is just the actual grid, which is the canvas. And then we have a footer here which just has my GitHub. All the const variables obviously don't get changed, and the first four are just different parts of the HTML. So the grid container. Okay, so the first const grid container is just the actual grid container, everything here. And the grid size text, which is just the text here. The next is the grid sizer, which is this input range tag. And then the background color, which is just the input color tag here. Next, these consts are all the buttons: the rainbow button, the toggle eraser, the toggle grid, and the clear canvas button. This next part is all of the buttons. So all the buttons you see here, this just contains the classes and IDs for all of that. The next set of variables are all related to the actual grid and the colors and the values. So the cell background color will just be the background color. This grid size will contain the value of the input here, because that will determine the dimensions. And the cell color, which will be the actual color of each individual cell, which will be dictated by either the rainbow function or whatever value the pen color is. Next, we have all the different modes. So the rainbow pen, when we click that, this will become true. Next, we have all the different modes. So the rainbow pen, when we click that, this will become true. The eraser, when that's been toggled, it's true, and the grid, when it's toggled, it'll be true. This is just how I'm able to let the page know that the mouse is being held down, and this will just become true when the mouse is down, and when the mouse is up, it will be false. The next part is just all the event listeners for the different buttons. So the rainbow button, on clicking, if it's false, then it will become true. The eraser will become false in the scenario that you switch from the eraser to the rainbow pen. And then we just add the class button on to it, change the CSS styling, and remove it from the eraser if it's there. And if it's true, then it will become false and no longer colored. And the eraser button, same exact thing, but instead for the eraser, and removes everything from the rainbow button. The clear grid button simply just deletes the grid, and then we recreate it with the size of the input range. Grid button just takes all individual cells and toggles the cell grid class on or off. The cell grid class just adds a border around the cell. And if it's true, then it will equal false, else grid equals true, and we just toggle the button on class to style it as we click it. This event listener on input here changes the background color. The reason it's on input is so you can see the different colors changing as you choose a color in the RGB thing here. Oh. So we just run a change background color, which takes all the cells that haven't been drawn on and changes their background color. And the way that happens is that cells that haven't been drawn on have a clean class, which I'll explain where it gets used later. The next part here just simply updates the text as we move the input range tag. So we have the grid size variable, which just contains the amount or the number of the measurement, whatever the number here is. And we get the grid size text, which is the variable that contains this div, and we just make the text content the grid size variable, which just contains the number. The next part creates the new grid every time we update this by simply deleting the grid and then recreating the grid with whatever the value of the input range tag is. As denoted by here, the next part of the code is purely just functions. So the first function, create grid, simply just creates the grid every time we call it. So once we change the size of the grid, this function will be called. When we clear the canvas, we delete it and we create it, so it gets called. And originally when we load up the page, a grid obviously gets created. So these first two lines are just so the first part, these two lines just make sure the columns and rows of the grid here are evenly split between the numbers. So if it's 49, then it will make sure that there's 49 evenly split here, so we have perfect squares. Then we do the loop to create all the necessary divs, as doing this by hand will take far too long. So we run a for loop for the amount of needed cells here, as you can see, and then we add these two classes to them. So when the grid is originally created, I make sure to I add the cell class to indicate that it's a cell, and a clean class to indicate that nothing's been drawn on it. And if toggle grid is true, then we also add the cell grid class to it in order to have the border. And then we add the two event listeners that listen for the click to draw on it. As you can see, when I click, it changes color, and when I drag over, we can draw. So I also apply a background color to it, and which will be whatever the canvas background color is. And then the cell just gets appended to the grid container div, which gets populated by loads of divs. The next function, change cell color, changes the color of the cell as indicated by the name, and this gets used every time we draw or every time we erase, since the cell color changes. So the first one is if the event type equals mouse over and the mouse button isn't being held down. So if it's just over, we don't want anything to happen, so we just return and the function. Otherwise, we get each individual cell, and if the eraser is false, otherwise we get each individual cell, and if the eraser is false, then the color that the cell will be changed to will be indicated by whether the fact that rainbow pen is currently true. So if rainbow pen is true, then we get a random color from a random color function down here, which simply just creates a random hexadecimal color by getting a random decimal, multiplying it by this, converting it to a string, and then we concatenate this to it in order to get a hexadecimal value. So once we have the cell color that we want, then we style the background to cell color and remove the clean tag, which basically indicates that the cell has been drawn on. And then if eraser is true, then I get all the classes of that individual cell, check if it's clean already, so I don't add the same class over and over, and if it is, I return. If it isn't clean, I add the clean class and change the cell color to whatever the background color is supposed to be. The next function here, change back color, simply changes the background color of the canvas every time we change it. So we make an array of all the clean cells, because when we change the background color, I don't want it to change all the colored cells. So and then for each clean cell, we simply change the background color to whatever has been chosen here. And then we update the cell background color variable by just giving it the value of this input tag. Next function, delete grid, self-explanatory, just deletes the grid. We make an array of all the cells and then we just remove each of the cells. And the final part of the script is pretty simple. On load we just create the grid, originally 16 by 16 as requested by the Odin project, and we update this text here by giving it the original size. And yeah, that's all the JavaScript. Hopefully it made sense. The links will all be down in the description for my GitHub and the website. Thanks for watching and I hope you have a great day.